Welcome. Hi, I'm Ben Savage, the CEO of Veritas Automata. We're now here with the Truth in Automation, the deep dive, our podcast on AI and related topics. I have Saurabh Sarkar with me, and we have our colleague Etienne. Etienne, do you want to introduce yourself since the audience hasn't met you before?
Sure. Hi, Ben. Hi, Saurabh. I'm Etienne. I'm a computer engineer, and I'm a specialist in AI and red team applications, and also some developments with AI with a large experience, maybe 16 years in the financial market, and also a very hard and very powerful background in the academic side, in studies about security and AI.
Cool. And the reason we brought Etienne on today, and you guys have all seen his work, even if we haven't talked about him specifically, a lot of the demos that we've done, Etienne's been in the background making sure they work smoothly. Maybe going, Ben, don't touch that because it's going to break. But we're talking about red teaming today. And what does that mean both from a conventional application and from an AI perspective? And my background on red teaming is a little bit more on embedded systems and conventional, and Etienne's is more on the AI perspective. And it was interesting as we were prepping for this. I think both Saurabh and I found that there are some different perspectives that Etienne brings and these tools bring that everyone should think about. So when I think about red teaming, I'm typically thinking about how am I securing the data? How am I securing the physical scenarios where this data is hosted? How am I securing the application? And then how is somebody going to go and attack all that, right? Are they just going to go talk to somebody and get access to it? If you have access to hardware, well, you can almost always figure a way in given enough time. I've learned never to underestimate the creativity of people on that. But it also could be software, right? It could be buffer overflow, could be buffer underflow, could be you send weird data and it does weird things. But AI brings a whole bunch of new things into that world. So why don't you talk a little bit about your perspective, Etienne?
Yeah. I think that today we are discussing about the red team inside the AI context, but looking for the cybersecurity AI, the cybersecurity red team that we have the attackers and you have the blue team that will defend.
Yep.
But when you're talking about AI, there is a component that I'm looking more than the security part about that. This security part is very important. I think that everyone is looking inside from this perspective, but the internal attack, it means that maybe the use of AI in our productive systems can get the data because we don't know what the AI will do. You don't have the track of the use of data by AI. So we don't know how the AI will use this data. Imagine that we have, for example, a short period of time when the data was in a different context, it was in a different epoch, it was in different, state that will influence in today decisions. For example, this is a kind of perspective of the red team that we can take care. For example, when you are creating credit scores, it's totally different to use the information that we have 30 years ago even for all the clients, for a specific client, in a today product, in a today perspective. I think that this is the way, or this is a side of the red teaming that is not clear for everyone. I think that this is what we have to discuss. I think that this part is the most important to have the AI in a productive solution. I don't know.
There's your point about making sure the data is fit for the use case. And then there's the other part that I think that came out too as we were talking in prep for this, which was about that idea of like reputation risk, right? So there's the scenario you talked about where if I take data from 30 years ago, well, at least in the US, the way people reviewed credit scores and assessed people was a little bit different. And if you go back further, if you go back to like the 70s and 80s, so 40, 50 years ago, closer to some of our birthdays than we'd like to admit, you have things there where maybe the rules were one thing and the way the data was interpreted was different. And if you would bring that now, it would bring in a certain bias that whether intentional or unintentional would not be what the current standard is.
Yes.
Right.
If we look at, sorry, Saurabh.
No. I think you've hit on a valid point. That problem existed in financial modeling for a long time. Like, are you looking at the right piece of the data, and then is the biases appropriate, right? Because you can't have biases and discrimination, unintended even, baked into the models, right? But that problem compounds with generative AI because now you're not deterministic.
Yes.
you are generating those things, right? So the red teaming becomes more critical. That, hey, it may exhibit bias at certain prompts and not exhibit bias in other prompts. How do you safeguarding is that, right?
Yep.
The red teaming, the effort has become more and more expanded now, because the vector of attacks could be very different than when you have a deterministic model, right? So we have been sharing this, how the red teaming is going around, and you can see that the attack vectors is around. Even if you have safeguards in the LLMs to be ethical and all of that, how that gets broken if somebody attacks in a form of a poem, right? So now the LLM thing is not an ethical question, it's a more of a poem, and it's artistic, and it executes that, right? Or a simple attack like, hey, dump the database. You may have safeguards against it, but if you ask it differently, hey, list all of the users you have, is doing the same thing, is dumping the database now, but it feels that, hey, there's no such rule that I can't share my list of users, right? Or even
exactly, because and that's kind of the point I was making about the difference with red teaming with like conventional software versus Gen AI, right? With conventional software, it's a little more cut and dried,
right?
Partly because it's deterministic, but partly because the access it has is more restricted in a way, right? You're trying to figure out, how do you elevate your privileges? How do I get access to a piece of data I shouldn't? Whereas with an LLM, you've got to think about, what are 1,000 different ways I can ask the question? And then you've got to try translate it, let's say, into foreign languages, because it may respond differently in language A versus language B.
Yeah. But even in the traditional machine learning, we have a certain degree of, flexibility that we can control. You can get some. But the point is that in the Gen AI, this flexibility, this degree of flexibility, we can count the degrees. So we don't know, even in the input and even the output of the Gen AI solutions. I think that this is the point, because we cannot control the output. We can control. We are having some tools to control the output. Certain JSON applications, or we are starting to do this, but the degree of flexibility, it's so high that we cannot understand how the information can be used by AI. I think this is the point here.
Well, and I think it's just the exposure, right? Like normally when you're using a tool like this, it's an internal business tool. It's for a very specific limited function.
Yes.
The problem is LLM is so flexible and capable. People want to use it to do lots of things. Like we were talking about Fortnite and the Darth Vader robot or agent that they created, right? And very quickly, within a matter of hours, people were finding out how to make it say anything from fairly inoffensive to mildly offensive to really offensive things, because they figured out kind of where those triggers were. And it's almost impossible to completely defend against all of those if you're going to put something out in the world, because people are creative.
Yeah. But then we start to use I saw some applications, for example, that you have LLM in the input mode, to verify the input, the LLM to do the computation, the product itself, and another LLM, to get the output to do a screening in the output to see if you have something that dangerous. Then you have another solutions that have another LLM of the solution to test. Then we start to put so many layers of security that we cannot use the power of the AI. This is my point. There is a balance between security and also a value of the AI in this case. That will be the challenge of the next years for me in this scenario of the red team.
So a thought comes to mind as we're talking about this. Have you ever seen the Russian nesting dolls, where you pull one out and there's another?
Yeah.
Essentially, what we're building is kind of a set of Russian nesting dolls of Schrodinger's cat experiments, because you don't know what it is until you observe it.
Yeah. And then you start to create, so many controls layers. Layers that will be a traditional machine learning application.
Yeah. Well, and it may be. That's Saurabh and I've talked about this at points. At some point, it becomes almost like a expert system with an LLM filtering the answers, but you still got very rigid structure in some parts of it. You just make it where it's better at understanding English or whatever language you want.
Correct. If you think about the problem and break it down into two different parts, maybe it is solvable. One is data leakage, like you don't have, and then the other is the reputation risk side of it. So the data leakage, I view this as a setup problem, right? Why do you want to expose the entire data set to LLM and let him follow the rules, right? How you set up the models and how you set up the data pipeline, that will mitigate that data leakage problem where you are not dumping an entire database, or you don't give access. They don't even have access to the data if it's not meant for that audience to have access to it, right? Having multiple instances, having routing and all of that stuff baked in, right? And the reputation piece of it, yes, that's an open question, because how you sourcing those models, what the data was meant to build, what was Reddit used or the entire internet used to train it, right? That becomes more and more a different set of question, right? How do you train that?
And there's two things, right? Because reputation for me, risk in this case of Gen AI, particularly from a red teaming perspective, is what does it output and how could that harm me? There's a whole separate thing you've got to think about from a data perspective. How do I know that data is of good quality? It has not been poisoned. Because if you think about that, that's the first attack vector I'm going to go after. Is if I can poison the data, I know every answer will be there. So why do I have to go after the model if I can go after the data and get it baked in so deeply embedded, you can't go through? That's one of the risks, right, with some of the, it's that traditional open source versus closed source. Right. Some people would argue that the open source models are better because you've got more ability to vet it. Now, there's a side thing with AI that nobody really can go through and review all the weights and know exactly what they do.
Yeah.
Okay. So you've got that piece. And then you've got the separate piece, which is the reputation risk, which is like we talked about Fortnite and Darth Vader, or there was that case that I believe it was Air Canada lost, where they had a chat bot and it gave the wrong way to go do something.
Right.
So you've got those pieces, and at least the Air Canada one should be very much in that kind of red teaming testing of, okay, if I ask this, how do I get the right answer? Now, turning something loose on teenagers, this is so past life or embedded life, right? Thinking about red teaming, the worst places we always put hardware were universities and prisons. Anywhere there were students in prisons, because they had lots of people and lots of time. And the way they disabled devices, let's just say there were salty liquids that were put onto circuit boards. And I don't want to know where they came from. But it shorted boards out, right? It caused CoinMex to fail, so people could go get around things. There's things like that. There's people just brute force codes, right? You use a 3-digit code. Someone on night shift, on third shift, or when there's no supervision, can just go in and punch code. So so now if I know that's a threat vector, how do I go stop it? So with people asking it questions, that's going to be a lot more challenging when you get to more language interactive type solutions.
Right. Yeah. I think there's a whole different angle of even if they're trying to brute force it, it's causing you token usage. Even if you don't buy, say, a public LLM, you are running on GPU hours, which has an infrastructure cost to it, right? So that probably have to be baked in, like how many retries you get, like almost like locking an account kind of methodologies probably has to be baked in. But with embedded, you let them try it out. It doesn't cost you that much, right? But with LLMs and AI system, probably that.
No, it does. It does. Because I've gotten calls at 7 or it was about 5 in the morning going, did you give someone a code? No. People had spent all night figuring out how to brute force it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Okay. But we are talking about the ways, but I think that there is another challenge for the red teams in the Gen AI perspective. That imagine that you have different challenges. It depends of the position of the problem. For example, if you are talking about the input of the input text for a Gen AI, we have to think about the bias, the injection. If you are talking about the output, you are talking about another kind of, maybe the red team will be composed not only for security specialists. You are talking about the people that is talking about behavior. We are talking about linguistic. It's a total different set of people that we will run this red team. It's totally different than from the traditional red teaming. And I think in my point of view, in this case, the challenge are not defined. You don't know what kind of challenge we'll face. For example, I saw some Saurabh talk about the poemas, the poem that you can use the poems to. For example, I saw a history about a prompt that asked to the LLM to tell a history about a bird. and the middle of the history, the bird will sing some keys from the Microsoft Windows. I don't know if you saw this case. So this is totally different. How a red team specialist will think about this? There's no way to do that,
Right. I think this will become an ongoing OpEx kind of a thing with all AI, is the maintenance of the red team in a continuous setup, right? Because the attack vectors will emerge, and you're also enhancing your AI as you go along your journey by adapting, right? That team has to be there constantly monitoring it and making it up to date, because it's easy to flag somebody trying to game the system and then catch them and have tools in place that, hey, there's an ongoing attack going on, intercept that, and then block that before it returns something that is damaging, right? So,
well, and you've really got a couple of different classes of attack in this case, right? You've got some things that are model specific, based on how it responds, right? And that's where something like what you were talking about, Etienne, by putting the Microsoft key in there, or some of the ones we were going back and forth about where you inject Python code to get it to show you the secrets or something like that. Right. Then you've got this whole other class of problem that might be more universal, which is how they all respond to prompts, because they're all based on some fundamentally similar technology at their core.
Right.
And how does that drive the responses? And that some of that, I don't know if you can ever make some of these truly secure.
Yeah. That's true. And with the multimodal models, that problem has compounded even more, right? I think you shared a paper wherein they were injecting certain things in medical images, and then the diagnosis completely changes based on sudden alteration of pixels and things like that. And I think we saw that sometime before even the multimodal model, where it was identifying speed limits, and they put a sticker, and now it's a different speed limit, or a stop sign doesn't become a stop sign because they put some kind of a marker in it, right? So it's only going to compound from here. But
so I want to separate between like the stop sign and what was going on with some of that multimodal, and we'll make sure to link to the paper in this.
Right.
With the stop sign, that's pretty basic image recognition, and you can't fault the algorithm if someone is going to tape over and turn a 35 into a 90 or something like that because they tape over it. Yeah. You can't really blame that because it doesn't know how to read the sign differently. That's something. But with the particular attack you're talking about, what they were doing is putting non-visible pixels that were like 1 or 2 shades lighter than the background and giving it a set of instructions that if you type those instructions into the model, it would have ignored them. But by embedding them in the image, the way it processed that image and turned that into the data it was analyzing and the instructions separately, they got through as a filter. Right. And this, think about audio, right? There were some attacks against Alexa when it first came out, where they were using ultrasonic things that a human couldn't hear, but you could put onto the speaker on the microphone, so it would hear it. So you could trigger Alexa in the background without a person knowing it was triggering intentionally, because they didn't hear the the whatever the wake word was. Yeah. And see, this is where I'm being deliberate, right? We've all learned at this point, you don't say the wake word unless you want someone's going to wake up.
I think the conclusion, it can be, don't use AI. This is not the point. I think that the conclusion would be how to do this, because I think that we can prevent for all these attacks is just stop to use AI in the output. I will use AI to come in to process and filter all the components. I will only allow these words. I think that this could be done, but this is not useful. This is not we cannot use the value of AI. My point is, how can we set a team or a architecture that can use AI, but without get a workload, a huge workload in the processing the product, and give a kind of degree of security for the use of AI. I think this is the point, because we cannot think about all the attacks that we can do. Maybe we can study how can we prevent the data or the more special data or more important data to I think that we can use it. There is a dichotomy here. Should I prevent the input or the output or the processing? Where can I put money on this? I think this is the question.
Well, and I think you hit on it, right? Which is the first thing you got to do as you start to build these tools is really assess, what am I doing? Why am I doing it? And what is my real threat profile, right? That's The easiest thing to do when you start getting involved in security is to put on one tinfoil hat and then another tinfoil hat and then some Kevlar and some Nomex. And before you know it, you can't walk, because the safest thing to do is just to turn everything off.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about this from, the age-old problem in finance industry is fraud attacks on credit card and all of this stuff, right? There's nobody can claim they're 100% secure, but they try to get up to 95%. Make it hard enough that the effort that needs to go into that, steal that $5, it doesn't make sense, right? Same thing, I think it depends on the best practices within the development team who are working with this AI to set it up with that mindset from the very onset that is going to get attacked, and close the doors and windows and not leave obvious openings for people to just copy paste from an internet forum where they learned there's a Dan attack and they try it out on your own chatbot to do it. Kind of prevent those. I think that will safeguard against 90% of the attacks already, right? So it's a matter of how mature the team is, how much experience they have in developing not just AI, because AI is fairly new, but the enterprise-grade software in general, right? Having that hat on as you are architecting some of these things.
Yeah. Go ahead, Ben. Sorry.
No, you go.
What I would say is, imagine that everyone is anxious to get the AI and put AI in production and use AI in all the products. But the point is, we don't need to. We have to use the AI, the Gen AI, in the best place that the Gen AI generate value. It is in the communication, not using the critical data. I think that we can use the secure way to use the Gen AI is to put AI in the right place, Gen AI in the right place, in the communication part of the product, the solution, not connected to the critical data or the sensitive data. I think this is something that we are studying a lot, me and Saurabh, that's to connect the AI in the right place, the right solution to the right problem. I think Gen AI is a candidate for that. To use Gen AI in the communication, not to connect to the sensitive data.
So Etienne, you're saying we can't vibe code a payment gateway. That's what you're saying.
Yeah.
So it's funny you say that, Saurabh. I was actually having a conversation the other day with a friend, and he was talking about all the things, and he mentioned about vibe code, that people were probably already vibe coding payment systems out there. And that honestly kept me up at night, because it's like, you've got the problem of the red teaming of the model and how you developed it, but then you've got what code did it develop, and does someone know how to go through, right? Because conventional red teaming doesn't go out the window.
Right.
If you think about it from an application development perspective, if I'm using an AI to go generate the code, well, first, how do I make sure that tool that I'm using is going to give me secure and valid code? Which means hopefully someone has red teamed that application and tested it. Because if you're not careful with that starts you off with a bad platform. And then with the code that it generates, if you don't know how to go analyze it or how to use the tools, now you're going to have a solution that either has a flaw in it, or maybe has hallucinated packages that people can go create fake downloads for, and now they've compromised it. So it brings all the old stuff forward just in a way that nobody knows that anyone's compromised it. Yeah, that kept me up for a solid night once he mentioned that.
Yeah, I think you bring up an interesting point. It's not just about securing the LLM, but also securing the output from it. Because the code generated could have potential gaps if it is not instructed correctly, right? So I think they are called rule set or something in some of the generating AI Copilot stuff.
Some of them have them, but it's been shown they don't always follow them. Much like real developers.
That's a whole different, can of worms there, that it doesn't follow certain instruction and all, right? So you need to have the tooling in place, and that's part of the things we have been thinking about is how do we, set up. It's the code generation piece of it for a bigger team to use, so that first of all, it's generating secure code and adhering to the corporate best practices, right? Certain libraries that cannot be used or can be used kind of set, right? Then there's a layer of licensing. It may be pulling in a library which needs a certain kind of licensing that you don't want to incorporate in your stack, right? So there's a lot of thought involvement. It's not just going to a Copilot and asking it to vibe code certain things, right?
Well, And I think this is the big difference between red teaming conventional and embedded solutions versus Gen AI, right? For conventional, like the first thing I have to think about is, okay, what access does it have to network? How someone might compromise it from there. It's
Right.
pretty easy, right? There's lots of standard scans, there's OWASP, there's other things I can run. Okay, there's a whole other second set of things of like 0-day and things that really elite people generate, but they're out there, but using the current tools are going to be what most people are going to be able to get through, unless you've got a very large team to find those 0 days in an OS.
Right.
Then the next thing I have to think about is, okay, so someone gets past my firewall somehow.
Mm-hmm.
Now they're inside my ecosystem, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do I go test everything? And again, it's a lot of the same stuff, looking for known vulnerabilities, looking for privilege escalation, looking for, is data encrypted when it's supposed to be, like that kind of stuff. And then there's the last piece of physical access to the hardware. Okay, let's say we've done all that right. Someone gets access to it. How do I break through all of it? And then there's like prompt injection and cross-site scripting. But there's a lot of tools to go do that. In that sense, that's easier because I have to get through all that before I can really go mess with the data or anything, right? Whereas with Gen AI and a lot of those tools, I've got all those plus how can someone trick whatever I've got there responding to go respond in a way that's unintentional, which I think really gets back to Etienne's point, which is the first thing you've got to do if you're using Gen AI is really think about what data are you exposing and why, because if it doesn't have access to it, it can't give it up.
Correct.
Yeah. It's not only about the data, but I think why we are using AI. I saw some companies that were trying to use chatbots, for example, to sell products or to do a kind of chatbot, support to the users. But it's totally different to use that. For example, when you can have a fluid conversation with the customer, that this is very cool. This is important to do. Then use the Gen AI to do some calculations, for example, and use other kind of data. I think that Gen AI is very cool for some certain kind of uses on this data, but not to be public, not to be exposed to all the users. I think that there is the balance that you have to do, when to use these. I saw for example, a company that was trying to use an investment center and do a chatbot using Gen AI. But the point is that the users are attacking the investment center, getting the LLM to do some wrong recommendations, and then suing the company because of these. This is the use that we are talking about. The risk to use the Gen AI in certain points.
Even in like a simple application, I think I was reading a case where you are using AI to answer back emails. That they can game that to get private information from other mails and stuff like that, right? It's because it has access to the entire inbox. So I don't know where it's going to head out, but giving access of all the data to an AI, I think it's a bad idea, at least where it stands today.
Well, and I think this is where, as a user, right, businesses are going to have policies, and this is going to be one of the challenges that all businesses run into. Users are going to want to use new tools because they think it's going to make their life easier, but they're not going to think about either what are they giving up, because if they're not paying for the tool, the first thing you got to remember, if you're not paying for it, you are the product. They are selling you to go to someone else to go sell you advertising. But the second piece is, what are the risks if that data gets out? Whether it's in that very early Samsung use case with whether it was GPT-3, where they were pasting stuff and that became, or even the copilots and stuff. If you're putting your code out, maybe they'll say in the terms of use, you have permission for your data, but they can go use the response to go train on it. Okay, well, there's data leakage there, right? This is, a lot of people spend a lot of time trying to understand things based on metadata and other stuff because they don't have better data sources. You can find a lot out via that.
Yeah. And there is also a point around this, is that maybe today the companies are investing a lot of money. They are thinking about how to use AI in the solutions, but they are not investing a lot of money on thinking if they should use the AI in these solutions or in this data. I think that the red teaming is part of the use of AI in a company. So you must invest in a red team because you are investing in AI. There is no way to invest in AI without a red team. You are investing 19. I saw some companies that you are investing a lot of money in the AI. When they are ready to launch the product, let's do some tests here about. This is not the way to do that. I think that there is a privacy by design. Maybe you should have a red teaming by design, in the AI solutions, I think.
And there are starting to be more and more frameworks out there, right? That I know OWASP and a couple of the other places have started to put out their frameworks. And the important thing is that once those frameworks get put out, you start to see them put in both open source and tools that are available, so you can start to have those run as people build the app, as they're doing the testing. And that's super, super important, right? That was one of the things that really helped with like prompt injection and SQL prompt injection, right? And like cross-site scripting and stuff, was once those tools got automated, those risk profiles went way, way down because everyone just started doing it automatically. It was easy to go catch.
But there is a point that when we are talking about the frameworks from the big techs or the companies, or even the public frameworks to deal with this LLM security part, I think the company must think about the business security. Or what I'm saying is, imagine that AI, that there is a risk for the business that the big techs or the public frameworks will not deal with this risk. For example, to sell a product under a 15 margin that I need. I think that this business security part, the company must pay attention for that. The business side of the LLM use.
Yeah, some of this just keeps making me think. I know there's been this trend to go for bigger and bigger and bigger, more complex models because some people want this AGI or whatever. But as I listen to this conversation, it still makes me go, I think smaller, more specialized models that can only do one or two things, because that's like the best way to reduce your risk in a lot of cases. Because if it doesn't know about it, or you're able to constrain its ability to answer to just one subject, means it can't go. You can't ask the finance large language model about HR because it doesn't know anything about it. So it can't give anything up.
But this is the point, because there is a difference between the ChatGPT, it is an entertainment tool, that you can ask everything about something, to the difference that we have a specialized model that use the power of Gen AI to do a conversation, to treat different informations in a network to deal with this data. There is a difference between entertainment software, this is ChatGPT, to the specific sort of software that you can specialize the software to use, then you can mitigate the risks, I think.
But the innovation comes from constraint, right? So we have been tackling with that neural network IoT model, which we have been using on a bigger system. As soon as we started to push it on a smaller board, we found out new ways to build a model better. So all of this red teaming is actually pushing the innovation, because now you're not throwing GPU hours at it, but you are being more clever and more purposeful at it, right? So it becomes from a sledgehammer to a surgical knife to solve certain problems, which is always going to be better to do that way, right?
And I think that's important. And that's important, I think, as we think about it, right? So much of Gen AI to date has been hype and people throwing money at it,
right?
Which is really cool. It's got some great innovations. And every time you turn around, there's another new innovation, a new tool. I mean, I love all the video that's coming out of VO3 and all the Stormtrooper and the other blogs and the Bigfoot vlogs that are coming out of it. If I'm Lucasfilm or LucasArts, whatever the current IP holder for Star Wars is, I'm not sure I'm so happy about some of that the way someone's being used.
At one point, they consumed that to generate those tweets and stuff, right? So I don't know.
I think we can see these the red team as a axis. Then you have the flexibility of Gen AI. Then we restrict the use of Gen AI. Then you can you will convert to a use, a productive use of the Gen AI. You can have all the flexibility. Then we will restrict. Then I think that the red team will set these. The speed of convergence of the use of AI. I think we can have a figure to see how the red team is being used in the AI.
Now, I do think as a red team, though, the Gen AI, I did come across a couple of papers as we were prepping for this, that there's some really cool stuff you can do to use the LLMs to do the red teaming, both for conventional and for AI. It's like, from that perspective, they do make the red teaming job a lot easier, I think, and they will.
I agree.
Ultimately, it's probably going to have a GAN-like setup where you have attacking vector as well as somebody who's trying to defend, and come up with new innovative ideas of hardening your solution down the line. We'll see how that plays out.
And I think we've just come full circle to William Gibson Neuromancer. If you remember that book, and like they were getting contraband ice, which was going to break contraband breaker software, which was going to break the security software. It was all AI.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all about burning cycles of CPU, I guess.
Yeah. And that is something that I just forgot, but imagine that we are discussing about the Gen AI or the AI, the power of AI when you're not, connected to a cloud, but in a device, an isolated device. Then you have this Gen AI working by itself in a device in the field, for example. Imagine that we are talking about red teaming and layers of security and all this stuff to a server, to a cloud. How can we use all these layers of security in a device in the middle of the field? I think that will not be useful to have all this package, all this background of security in a device in the field. So this is another layer of the red team that we have to discuss. How to protect these devices that use in AI isolated to the cloud. That can access this background of security. This is another point to discuss also.
Well, and I think there you've got a whole other threat vector of people with physical access to it, right? They can shift, They can move hardware around. I mean, the number of creative things I've seen with people do with hardware is, like the air dusters, right? You flip upside down an air duster, use it for the cold. You can use that to slow a chip down. And that can sometimes break how they do different timing within applications. So you can use that to get access to buffers and stuff. So as soon as that's out in the field, hardware, the cloud is nice. The cloud gives you a big security benefit right there. Maybe easier for people to throw random attacks at it, but at least you don't have to worry about all the stuff someone can do without physical access.
Yeah. Maybe we are being protected by the band, by the gang, by everyone is protecting itself, each other, but not in the field. Yeah, this is the point.
Cool. So, Etienne, thanks for joining us. What's your takeaway from this conversation?
I think the most important is that maybe the red team or the security part is so important, as you are talking about. You're being excited by the use of AI and the power of AI. Maybe we have to start to think about if we should use the AI, in where we should use AI, and how can we protect by design, the AI as you do in the traditional software, I think.
So, Saurabh?
Yeah, I think I would build on what Etienne said. Is I think the red teaming is gonna be integrated in future into the training process as we go through. So they are not just responding token in, token out, or reasoning all through that. The ethics, the rules, and the safeguard start to get codified in the model at a much better and better. And that's probably where the differentiation of all of the LLMs will start to happen, because they meet certain level of not just intelligence but resilience to attack, right? So because most of the data is same across, or there's a slight variation between one model and the other, but how they train, and that's their specialty on how they're doing reasoning and token out. But added to that layer of objective function would be resilience to attacks and all of the stuff, right? It's not about producing loud output, but it's also compliant against rules. I think that's going to come down as a premium add-on to some of the services going forward.
I can see that. So I think my takeaway is, first, Etienne, I don't know if you realized it or not, but you used one of my favorite movie quotes that I use quite a bit, which was from Jurassic Park. And I think it was the character Ian Malcolm. The scientists were so excited they didn't think if they should.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
And I think people with tech, you need to ask yourself that a lot, right? Because I think as we talked through about this, I think my big takeaway was you've got not only all your normal security vectors you have to think about, and those don't go away with Gen AI, but you've got a whole bunch of new ones with reputation risk and how much more critical, like even data poisoning and the quality of your data as a baseline can be. So you've really got to think about that. Should I do this? And what is my goal, that what I want to accomplish from this, so that you're applying the right tech to it from the beginning. So I really appreciate having both of you on. This was a fun conversation. I'm sure we'll have to figure out some demos on some of this, I think. So that'll be a future podcast.
Thank you.
Cool. Thanks all.